Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, or students, or dear students, or however. So, by request, I've decided to try and make a video for you guys about asthma, and I want to see how it works out, if it actually helps you guys. So, first things first, all of you must by now know that asthma is a restrictive condition, so all of your airways are restricted. So, where are we at? So, we're somewhere in the lungs, obviously. So I just want to create two lungs, and I want you to more or less imagine where we're at. Okay, so the idea is that these airways within the lungs, the bronchioles and the bronchioli, are inflamed. So there's inflammation here. Okay. And there's more than one kind of asthma. So mostly we get atopic asthma, and we get intrinsic asthma. So just for you guys to know, over here in our PHC213 model, the one thing we're concerned about is the atopic asthma. We don't really go into the intrinsic asthma because the mechanisms here aren't really known. The only one we will go into a little bit is aspirin-induced asthma. But you must also know that we get things like exercise-induced asthma, cold-induced asthma, etc. But for purposes of this PHC213 model, we're basically going into atopic asthma. Atopic asthma makes up the most of it. It's the most important for us to understand it well. And if you understand the pathology within asthma, then you will also understand how the drugs work, because all the drugs act on different areas within the pathology. Okay, so back to the airways. So there's inflammation happening here. Somewhere in the airways, or everywhere in the airways, there's inflammation happening. And this inflammation is restricting the airflow into the lungs. That's why we can use the force expiratory volume to see how asthmatic a person is. And we usually measure this in mils per minute or per second, I think. I'm not 100% sure. I'll just double check this fact before I go too much in detail about it. Okay, but this is one way we're going to measure a person's asthma, if they're doing better or if they're doing worse. Okay, so what happens? How does all of this start? So let's imagine we're taking now a section over here and we're expanding it to here. Alright, now this is a cross section. So basically we took this pencil, we cut it, and now we're looking at it like this. Okay, so if you're looking at it like this, you'll see there are a lot of layers within the airways themselves. So firstly you get your ciliated epithelial cells here. Then you get something called the basement membrane. And then you get your lamina propria. Alright, lamina propria, and then you get your muscles. And then you get your glandular layer, which also forms part of the submucosa. Okay, so this is what's happening here. So when there's inflammation, all of these guys will get bigger. So as they're growing, they grow inwards. So eventually this path where the air would have gone through would be so small that airflow would be obstructed or restricted. Asthma is a restrictive air condition. Alright, so imagine now all of them are bigger, and we've got a big excess of mucus in here as well. So a lot of mucus. Then we can eventually get an obstruction. And now imagine that these muscles will not be pink, these muscles contract. They contract. This air will eventually almost be closed up. So there are three things we are concerned about in asthma. We call it the triad. On the one side, we've got obstruction, we've got smooth muscle hyperactivity. I'm not sure if it's SC or CS. Ish. Okay, we've got smooth muscle hyperreactivity. Let's just say hyperreactivity or hypersensitivity, maybe. You can also say that. Or you can say bronchoconstriction. So if you're thinking constriction, what receptors are you thinking of? I hope you guys are thinking of muscarinic free receptors. Alright? And if you think of an obstruction, think of the acid over here making the obstruction. Not the acid, sorry, the mucus making the obstruction. So you'd think of a muscarinic 1 or 3. But in the lungs, the thing that activates the muscarinic, the mucus secretion is muscarinic free receptors. So you can just cancel out that one. So, but I want you to remember that muscarinic 1 and 3 receptors can cause activation, while muscarinic 2 receptors will be inhibition. All right. And then, so we've got obstruction, we've got smooth muscle, hyperactivity, and then lastly, we've got, well, not lastly, but probably the most importantly, we've got inflammation. So if I'm referring to the pathology or pathogenesis of asthma, I would at least expect you guys to understand the triad over here, at least to know about it. But I would ideally want all of you to know all of the pathology. So let's go into some pathology. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to cut this section of the lung here, and we're going to unfold it like this and put it onto the page. Okay, so now keep your beatings about you. Okay, so let's start. So top layer, we said we have ciliated epithelial cells. So let's draw something like this. What is so amazing about ciliated epithelial cells? Well, in a certain sense, they are specialized. These cilia on top is like little hairs. These things I'm trying to draw here are little hairs. So what these little hairs do is they carry the mucus upwards. So normally during the day, you'll gather mucus here, and then as you are relaxing, these ciliated epithelial cells, these cilia, will move the mucus upwards. So during the day, you'll get some debris in here, you'll get some dust debris, you'll get some random things in there, and then your ciliated epithelial cells will move them upwards in the mucus, and then you will eventually swallow them down. So that's a normal process. So the mucus is a good thing. If you have too much mucus, that's a very different story. But we'll get to that. Okay, so guys, following me here, ciliated epithelial cells. Then we have this magical, well, not magical, this special cell here. It's called the dendritic cell. So we'll just draw it like this. All of the images I'm drawing here are just kind of for representation purposes. How they actually look is a very different story. Okay. So this is the first layer sorted out. So we have our ciliated epithelial cells here. I'm just going to say CE. Here we have a dendritic cell. I do not expect you to know all of these names in such detail, but I do expect you to understand the basic pathology I want to draw here for you, or explain, or however. Okay, then we've got something called the basement membrane. The basement membrane runs there, alright? So we'll just say BM there. Okay, and then we've got something called the Lamina Propria. Let's make the Lamina Propria. Okay, unfortunately I don't have enough color pens, so it's going to be black as well. So just as I'm drawing it, follow my voice. Alright, so then we've got the Lamina Propria. In relation to how thick each is, they're probably very much the same. I'm just drawing it like this because here's where a lot of the inflammatory processes will happen. So in here you've got your fibroblast, and you've got a lot of collagen and I can't remember the last one. Fibroblast, collagen, and I want to say fibrin, but I'm not sure. Okay, so you've got some fibroblasts in here. Think of this as a meshwork. A lot of the structural integrity of the entire airway will come from this. So it's a mesh layer. But inside of this mesh layer, there's a lot of immune cells. So we'll make some mast cells, and then also some of the mast cells will be caught outside here. Okay, and then a lot of other leukocytes, but we won't go into too much detail about that because we're not worried about the resting phase, we're worried about the inflammation phase. Okay, there is your lamina propria. Now moving more downwards, now you'll get your muscular layer, your smooth muscle layer. So I'm just going to draw it like this. So I want you to think of muscle fibers when you're looking at these. Okay, so here we've got some muscle fibers. Now what's important to know is that we've got muscarinic free and beta 2 receptors on here. Alright? So if a muscarinic free receptor is stimulated, what's going to happen? These muscles will contract. So this entire story, if these muscles, this layer here contracts, it will move inwards. And you see now, there's going to go less air through here. So you see, eventually, the airway is so closed up and there's so much mucus in there that it will almost be like trying to whistle. So think of the wheezing sound when you look at all of these things running together. So if the airway is constricted a lot, think of wheezing. Okay, that's a symptom. That's the main symptom. Okay, we've got a muscle layer. Muscarinic free receptor stimulation causes contraction. Beta 2 stimulation causes relaxation. So over here, we've got drugs like, I'm just going to do this all, you guys are going to at least follow me in some ways. Over here, let's make it like this, and let's do it like this. Okay, so beta 2 agonists are something like salbutamol. This is a SABA, short-acting beta agonist, alright? Now in theory, if we took something that blocked beta 2, we'd get the opposite effect. So a drug, for example, I want to say atenolol, but it's not atenolol, propranolol. could actually induce asthma in some people, because propranolol is an antagonist. So if an agonist gives you dilatation, an antagonist will obviously give you contraction, or just the absence of dilatation, which is more close to a contraction. Okay, just to give you an idea. And the most important drugs to remember here for me is salbutamol, obviously, and then something like long-acting beta agonists, let's say phenytoral or salmeterol. And they work exactly the same way, they just work longer. And the subas are indicated as relievers of asthma attacks, while the long-acting beta agonists like phenytoral and salmeterol are not indicated as relievers. Okay, so remember always reliever. Number one reliever, most important thing to know about salbutamol. So this is where we start with therapy. Easiest way to start. Okay, but I digress. I'm going off topic again, as normal for me. Alright, muscarinic-free agonization will give a bronchoconstriction, that these muscles will contract. So we're thinking of something like ipratropium. Why ipratropium? Because it's an antagonist. So if you get ipratropium inside, it will antagonize the effect of contraction, which is dilation. So if you give something like ipratropium, which is normally I can't remember what you call it now. You inhale it as a it's nebulization. Okay, so in the elderly, please remember this. In the elderly, we will especially want to use something like ipratropium because salbutamol can have cardiac effects. Remember, there's a beta-1 receptor on the heart. Beta-1, beta-2, still very similar. So if you have a high concentration of beta-2 stimulus, they can possibly stimulate beta-1 receptors as well. And if you stimulate the beta-1 receptor on the heart, what will you get? Tachycardia. Do you want tachycardia? In an elderly patient, you might have some hypertension. I hope you're thinking no, because that's the right answer. No. So in the elderly, ipratropium is the better reliever to use. It's also a reliever, but it's not a controller. Neither of these two are controllers, they're relievers. What do we mean by control? What do we mean by relief? In relief, we want to quickly relax the muscle. In control, we want to control the inflammation, because the inflammation will ultimately increase these two over as well. Okay, but we'll get to that as well. So many things to cover in here, but we'll manage. If you don't manage, pause the video, recap, go on. Okay, we've done that. Now let's make our glandular layer down here. Okay, so all of this is part of the mucosa, and this is the submucosa. I'm not sure if I've got the right way around, but let's say I do. Okay, so here we've got glands, and these glands have muscarinic-free receptors on them. Okay, so just imagine to yourself, you've got receptors all around these glands, and these glands are much bigger than I'm drawing them here, but representation purposes. So they would produce mucus, and the mucus would diffuse through these layers upwards, and eventually they will go sit here on top and make a little layer, which traps the dust, etc. And then the cilia moves them upwards. So these are all the normal mechanisms. So in this case, there's still a lot of airflow running around. We're still happy. But of course, if it was normal, we have no problems. But this is not just normal. Okay, so how did we get asthma? Okay, so let's quickly make a drawing for fun. This is Jimmy. And this is Jimmy's dad. He is much taller than Jimmy. Oh, he's probably standing on a stair there. Okay, so this is the first time. Now, Jimmy and his dad, let's just call me Dad and Jim. Jimmy and his dad went for the walk the very first time. And then Jimmy inhaled some pollen for the very first time. He's never inhaled the pollen before. This is the absolute first time. Just give me a quick minute. Okay, so I think we were still stuck at Jimmy. And then for some reason, I had a technical error. Probably a self-inflicted technical error. Oh well. Dad, Jimmy. Jimmy is breathing in an allergy here, or breathing in an allergen. So let's just say allergen. Okay, but Jimmy's dad is also breathing in an allergen. Okay, so why will he not get an asthma attack and Jimmy will eventually get an asthma attack? Because this is a predisposed individual. So let's imagine Jimmy's mother had a tendency to be allergic. Then he could have easily inherited this from her. And that's not the only thing that leads to allergies. There's a lot of theory about industrialization. So saying the more we trying to keep ourselves clean, and the less bacterial exposure we get, the more likely we are to have an increased sensitivity for allergies. So that goes back to the hygiene hypothesis. But I don't expect you to know this. This is still a hypothesis. Why would I teach you hypothesis in clinical or anything clinical? I wouldn't, but I think it's interesting and it does help a little bit. So normally you've got your T helper cell, a naive T helper cell, and then so the dendritic cell will tell this T helper cell to differentiate into either a Th2 cell or a Th1 cell. So in normal cases, Th2 cells deal with parasitic infections. Oh, am I spelling it completely wrong? Let's just say parasites. Parasites. And your Th1 cell would deal with bacteria and endotoxins and exotoxins. So bacteria. So the theory goes, the less exposure you get to bacteria while you're young, the more likely you would form a Th2 cell. And you can see they're both going from the same pathway. Alright? So if your body uses up the Th0 to make Th2 cells, you'll have less Th1 cells. And one of the things is eventually this pathway will lead to increased IgG. And IgG suppresses the effects of Th2, and IgE suppresses the effects of Th1. Okay, but this is not extremely important. I just want you to know about it. I think it's very interesting. And there's a lot more theory about this. If you want to know more about this and you're interested, you can come speak to me. I really do like that subject. But I think I've gone into a little bit detail about it in class. Hopefully you were in class. If you weren't, yeah, that's nothing, can't be helped. Okay, so now I hope you understand. Jimmy is predisposed. His body is sensitive to these allergens. Jimmy's dad is not predisposed. His body is not sensitive to these allergens. Alright? So let's say this is Jimmy's first time breathing in this allergen. So now we breathed it in, we're zooming in, and it's ended up here. Let's say it's somewhere that one. It was dust previously, now it's an allergen. Allergen. Okay, and what can this allergen be? Dog dander, dust mites. It can be almost anything. It just depends on what your body is sensitive to. So almost anything. Please know that. Alright. Now, allergen has entered here. So the allergen is now stuck in the mucus. First thing that happened, this is the first time. The body is not primed for this reaction yet. The first time a person breathes in allergen, the person's body will become sensitized towards that allergen. It's not sensitized yet. So let's draw it here. So basically, it's going to end up here with the dendritic cell. So then the dendritic cell will absorb this and process it. And then it will tell a Th0 cell to become a Th2 cell. And this is where the big defect lies. This is where all of the things went wrong. So Jimmy's dad, this process never happened. And Jimmy's dad, his body never recognized the allergen as something dangerous. So the dendritic cell never told the Th0 cell, let's make a plan. So Jimmy's dad doesn't have a reaction. But Jimmy, who inherited the genes from his mother, now has this reaction happening in him. Okay, so we've now activated these Th2 cells. So now what's the problem? So I see I have run out of space, but I planned for this. Okay, so these Th2 cells will now secrete interleukin 5, 4, and 13. Okay, now let me just quickly remember which one. Okay, interleukin 4 itself. This interleukin 4 has been secreted. Let's do this. This interleukin 4 will stimulate beta cells to become plasma cells. Now, let me just get that right. Okay, to become plasma cells. Okay, and these plasma cells will now start to create IgE. Okay, so now these plasma cells are releasing these IgEs. Oh, now it looks like a cell. IgEs. These round dots will be IgEs. Okay, now we zoomed in here. We're going to zoom out and they're going to be dots. Or maybe, okay, that's a terrible idea. Let's make it like this, and then the IgEs will look like this. Okay. Okay, so these are antibodies, and they are in your body to direct the immune system to do something. Okay, you are following me here, I hope. Okay, so this process here this is now the initiation, the first time the allergen was breathed in. Remember, we didn't have something happening here, there was no reaction. This is only the first time we breathed it in. Now your body started to produce all of these IgEs. And now something that's very interesting is a lot of the people who have atopic diseases might very well have more interleukin 4, 13 and 5 receptors, or the Th2 cell might produce much more than normal. So this is something that tends to worsen the asthma. So you can imagine if a person had more receptors and they've got more genes transcribing and making more interleukin 4 and 5 and 13, the reaction would be worse. Okay, so imagine we've got that person, yeah. Okay, now let's revert back. So all I want you to know is Th2 will eventually lead to IgE. So now let's quickly, I'm just going to say here, process. Okay, now all of the IgEs will be born from this process, this allergic process. So we've got them floating around everywhere now. Where are they going to go? They're going to go everywhere. Okay, and where does IgE antibodies bind? To mast cells. So the IgE antibodies will bind to all the mast cells. But remember, they're now bound, but they first have to interact with an allergen before they stimulate the mast cell to degranulate. Okay, so they're priming all of these mast cells for degranulation. They haven't degranulated yet, they've just primed them. Okay, so that was the initial phase. That's the first thing that's going to happen the first time. You're just going to start this allergic process, and it will eventually lead to more IgEs. And then it will bind to this FERL receptor. I can't exactly remember. I think you guys will cover it in histamine. They will bind to these FERL or something like that receptors on these mast cells. But that's not important for asthma at the moment. I just want you to know about the process. All right. So now it's bound to all of these mast cells. Now, if a person breathes in an allergen again, what will happen? All right. Just quickly break from that idea. Before I go into that, I never mentioned this, but in as part of your anatomy in your respiratory tract, respiratory system, you also have vagus nerves running to the brain, and then brain hypothalamus and running back to the muscles. So over here, this is an efferent going to the brain, and you've got efferent coming back. So the efferent, let's take the efferent over here. It'll go to the muscles, and it will go to the glands. So your cholinergic stimulation can be sensitized by allergens binding here as well. Okay, so now I never mentioned that. Let me just quickly mention that first. So what I want you to know is allergens can intrinsically sensitize the cholinergic reaction in the body. Okay, and that's the first phase. That's just the start. Now, all right, we've got this thing primed. Now Jimmy's going on a walk with his dad again, and now things are going to get started. All right, so we've got our allergen here. All right. That's a bit big for allergen, but you get the idea. This allergen will now bind to this primed mast cell. Alright. Okay, it's bind. It'll bind to this vagal nerve here, it'll bind to the mast cell. So now we've got an increased sensitivity for contraction, and we've got increased mucus production. Remember the triad. Please remember it. Okay. So now we've got this unpacking already. That was caused by the allergen binding to the vagal nerves. The afferent vagal nerve running to the brain, causing an increased hypersensitivity. So increased muscarinic free stimulation, increased muscarinic free stimulation on the glands and the muscles. Okay. Now, what will happen to this first mast cell that was now stimulated to degranulate? It will release a few things. And I've mentioned this so many times. If you guys can't remember what releases, I'm probably gonna die. So now, for your understanding, let's quickly draw the ciliate epithelial cells again. And then we draw a mast cell on top here. And remember, this was a primed one with an IgE, and now the pollen has bound to it. Now it's degranulating, and it's releasing a few things. So, okay, I haven't drawn this perfectly, but we'll make it work. Okay. Okay, so this mast cell. This mast cell will release, firstly, histamine. Secondly, prostaglandins. The one that we are most interested in asthma is D2. And then leukotrienes. Can't remember how to spell it. Anyways, leukotrienes. So we've got D4, E4, and C4, I think. Those are the ones causing the most problems for us in asthma. And then there are a lot of other chemokines. So let's just say other chemokines. Okay, so remember this happened within that mucus layer on top. So it happened right over there. So the mast cells were trapped there and they were primed by the IgE, they bound, and then when they degranulated, they released histamine, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and other chemokines. So these four will firstly create spaces between these ciliated epithelial cells. And these spaces will allow the allergens to run through. What's the problem with that? We've got all of these mast cells running around here. And remember, we had this massive release of IgE from the Th2 process. It was a beta cell, plasma cell, and then we had the IgE. So now all of these ones are automatically primed. So the more allergens enter, the bigger the reaction will be. Okay, we're back. So we were at allergens, we were at reaction. Okay, I'm really back now. So all of these allergens now entered and primed these mast cells. No, all of the IgEs primed these mast cells, and now remember, all of these histamines, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and other chemokines released are making bigger spaces between these ciliated epithelial cells. So more allergens are entering and more mast cells are degranulating. So this is the initial reaction in asthma. So what are we releasing? And where are we releasing it? We're releasing histamine, leukotrienes, and I'll just make a HL, prostaglandins, and other chemokines. Don't worry about it now, I'll just make a star. So you just know about them, but we don't really have anything targeting them at the moment. So let's worry about histamines, leukotrienes, and prostaglandins. Okay, you guys remember what histamines do? Increased vasodilation, increased capillary permeability, and increased blood flow. So all of those things will lead to inflammation. All right, remember that? Think of the mosquito bites. Now, what do leukotrienes do? And this is important. So leukotrienes are bad news. Okay, so we've got our free layers here. Now we're going to transfer these free layers over here. Okay, we'll use them. Let's say this is in inflammation, and then let's say leukotrienes effects. Remember, they were slightly separated, so things could get in. All of the allergens could enter. Remember that one there could enter now. Okay, firstly. Now, this layer, the lamina propria, will be inflamed. Why? Because all the capillaries, and I think I didn't actually make this clear earlier, but there are a lot of capillaries running through this section here. And all of these capillaries will be dilated by histamine. So histamine causes capillaries to dilate. So if the capillaries dilate and they are more permeable, a lot of plasma will leak into the lamina propria and surrounding areas. So this lamina propria will become thicker. Okay, so inflammation. Okay, now this is all the effect of histamines and leukotrienes. Okay, but firstly we did histamines. Let's go to leukotrienes. Sorry, I'm confusing you again. Okay, leukotrienes. So leukotrienes do the same effect. They also cause vasodilation. Okay, so we've got increased plasma fluid building up in the lamina propria, and this layer will get thicker. And remember, if this layer gets thicker, there will be less air going through that section there. If that layer was bigger, all of the layers will be pushed in further and further until there's no air running through there. Okay, so inflammation, firstly. And then, a thing about the leukotrienes that are terrible is they increase the sensitivity of the smooth muscle. So smooth muscle hyperactivity. Okay, so now the stimulus needed for muscarinic-free stimulation needed to cause a bronchoconstriction is less. Okay, so they decrease the threshold. Okay, but I think I'm confusing with the up and down. So what I want you to know is smooth muscles become more hyperactive. Okay, more plasma enters the area, so inflammation layers get thicker. Okay, and then we've got smooth muscle hyperplasia. So this is an increase in the number of smooth muscle cells. So if you're looking at this layer, okay, well, let's say this is the inflammatory one. Let's create another one here. Okay, so ciliated epithelial cells on top, basement layer, lamina propria, and now the muscle cells. So this is what it looked like initially. Now under the effect of leukotrienes, more cells will be reduced and the muscle layer will get thicker and stronger. Okay, so what do you think is the problem with a big strong muscle? A stronger vasoconstriction. Okay, so the longer leukotrienes in this area, the more hyperplasia will happen. So that's another effect of leukotrienes I want you to remember, hyperplasia. So inflammation, smooth muscle hyperactivity, hyperplasia, and now there's one more. They increase the mucus secretions. All right, 2 seconds. We had mucus secretion increase. Okay, so we've got more mucus being produced. So if we have more mucus being produced, the mucus will travel upwards and the layer on top here will get thicker. Okay, now we've got a thicker layer of mucus here. Okay, so once again, if we've got a thicker layer of mucus in the middle here, I don't think this thing's actually making sense anymore. What I want you to know is there's a constriction happening, there's inflammation happening, and now there's mucus. So that airway is getting really small. So that's why you've got the wheezing sound. It's like a whistle. You've got a whistle plant into your lungs. Sounds funny and cool, but it's not. Okay. Yes. So that's more or less the worst things happening in the initial phase. Okay. All of these things happen together and they cause an asthma attack. Okay, so we've got the obstruction happening due to the mucus and due to all of these layers getting thicker and due to the constriction. We've got bronchoconstriction happening due to the increased sensitivity of these muscle cells, mostly due to the allergen binding to the efferent vagal, causing a sensitization. So if acetylcholine binds to mescaline-free, which will happen under normal circumstances, the reaction will be increased. Okay, and then we've got glands making more mucus. Inflammation, bronchoconstriction, and glands overworking, and that forms the triad. So the triad, you can basically think of leukotrienes. So that's happened. Prostaglandins have a similar effect as leukotrienes. They would also cause more or less the same reaction. All right, and now I think we've covered the basis of what mast cells secrete and what's the problem with what they secrete. Now, there's one more step left. So in the next step, all of these same things will happen. They will still happen. They will continue happening. This is the initial reaction. But we've got another role player in the process here. And the other role player comes in effect here. So we had this initial reaction, remember. And then these Th2 cells led to, secreted interleukin 13 plus, let me just quickly double check my facts again. Interleukin 13 and 5. Remember, interleukin 4 stimulated that process where the beta cells became plasma cells and then we had more IgE being produced. Interleukin 13 and 5 will now stimulate eosinophils. So let's make this thing an eosinophil. And this is a late phase reaction, so this happens later. And the eosinophils are all located in here as well, but they weren't stimulated. But this process is stimulating them, and this is a late phase reaction once again. So initially, all of the pathology comes from the mast cell, but later on, it comes from eosinophils. Okay, so now these eosinophils, what will they release? They will release eosinophilic major basic protein. And I hope you guys actually do read your books. You don't just buy them to tell your parents you're buying books. Let's just quickly go to page 344, I think it was. I hope I'm right. 344. I think I'm not right. Okay. Give me 2 seconds to find it. I'm disappointed in myself. It was page 344. Okay, so remember here, there's your beta cells, there's your plasma cells, that's all happening, eosinophils. So, look there, interleukin 4, beta cells, Ig antibodies. Okay, remember, sensitization as well. And they also bind to eosinophils. Now, interleukin 5 and 13, this is the late phase reaction. Binding to eosinophils, and then the eosinophils will secrete, look here, eosinophilic major basic protein and eosinophilic cationic protein. And these two are interesting because they cause those ciliated epithelial cells to become damaged. Alright, now running back to this process here. Okay, they're released, and these ones will now travel to the top layer with the epithelial cells, and they will damage them. And they will also release leukotrienes, and they will also release histamine. So this process can maybe happen 4 hours after initial attack. And then, as soon as the eosinophil has been activated, it doesn't need an allergen to continue secreting these eosinophilic major basic protein, and cationic protein, and leukotriene and histamine. So this can happen in the absence of an allergen, and this will happen later. And in status asthmaticus, this can even continue for 24 hours in a person suffering status asthmaticus. Okay, and that basically describes pathology of asthma. So, what do we want to do? Okay, but maybe I'll just mention this as well. When we talk about airway remodeling, it's basically all of these layers getting thicker, the hyperplasia happening here, the glands making more mucus, all of the inflammation, all right, that causes airway remodeling. So the airway becomes thicker and thicker and thicker until there's no air going through. That is airway remodeling. But in asthma, it is completely reversible. In COPD, the airway remodeling is due to another process, an inflammatory process, mostly due to smoking. And then the airways become fibrous and is irreversible. But in asthma, it's reversible. How do we reverse it? Drugs. Don't worry about that. All right, drugs. So, I hope you guys remembered. I said there are a few very important drugs. So, let's quickly think. We've got histamine here. We've got prostaglandins. We've got leukotrienes, other chemokines. And remember, we also had involvement from the eosinophils. And they had eosinophilic major basic protein, and eosinophilic cationic protein. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you here is all of the different areas we can work on. We have beta 2 receptors on the muscles, and we have hemispheric 3 on the glands, plus muscles. Okay, remember all of these were involved in that pathological process we just spoke about. You guys told me we didn't go into the drugs deep enough, but if you understand the pathology, we did go into the drugs a lot. So firstly, how can we inhibit histamine? So one of the effects of cortisone is it stabilizes mast cells, and mast cells have a smaller tendency to degranulate. Okay? Remember, these mast cells only degranulate when these IgEs were made. Eh? But if you're using corticosteroids like budesonide and beclomethasone, they inhibit the Th2 cell from secreting interleukin 4, interleukin 5, and interleukin 13. So remember, those chemokines are proteins. Now, if we're looking back at a cell in the first place, let's say this is a cell, and this is the nucleus, and here is the DNA. Let's hope I can draw it. Oh, wow, I'm actually impressed with myself. Okay, so over here is the area that will decode to make interleukins. So glucocorticoids actually act on this nucleus here. And that section of the DNA that was responsible for making interleukin 4, 5, and 13 will be inhibited. So the cell won't secrete it, so we won't, at the end of the day, get the IgEs. Remember, this process was the plasma to beta to IgEs. Okay, so if we don't make those IgEs, what do you think is going to happen in this process here? If these IgGs aren't running around, none of these mast cells can be primed, so it won't continually happen. Okay, so that's why corticosteroids are a form of a controller. So that's only one of the first things of glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids also increase the effectivity of beta 2 receptor stimulation. All right, and our mast cells aren't degranulating, we won't get the leukotrienes. All right, and even beyond that, glucocorticoids have the ability, this is something amazing, glucocorticoids have the ability to inhibit phospholipase A2. So in this process, we will eventually create arachidonic acid, and then we'll have a Cox reaction to produce prostaglandins, and we have a LOX reaction to produce leukotrienes. Okay? But if you use glucocorticoids, you are inhibiting this process here. So we won't create prostaglandins and we won't create leukotrienes. So we're inhibiting the release of, firstly it was degranulation of the mast cells, and we're inhibiting the IgE creation, all of these IgEs through this process. And now we're inhibiting the mast cells of forming all of these leukotrienes. And remember, the leukotrienes are causing most of the problems here. Inflammation, smooth hyperactivity, mucus secretions, all of these are increased with leukotrienes, but now the leukotrienes aren't being produced, and the IgEs aren't being produced, so mast cells can't be primed to even release them. So if we use glucocorticoids, we are effectively cutting out all of the main pathology here. All right. And we are increasing the effectivity of our beta-2, salbutamol, and salmeterol, etc. So if you go into your app and you go and you say chronic asthma, all of this is taken into consideration when they say budesonide or inhaled corticosteroid is the #1 therapy for asthma, because it acts on all of these. And because it acts on all of these, when they actually do their clinical trials, they can see it's more effective. And then when they try to explain why, they can see in the pathological process why it is more effective as well. So, I mean, I really want you guys to know a lot about glucocorticoids. So, what were the main side effects of glucocorticoids? Remember, we're inhaling these. Why do we want to inhale glucocorticoids and not use them systemically? Because systemic use of glucocorticoids have a lot of side effects. And you're using doses maybe of 60 milligrams a day or 20 milligrams a day. But when you're inhaling, you're only using something like 100 micrograms per puff. So you can use 400 micrograms a day. So if you're quickly dividing 60,000 micrograms by 400, you'll get an idea of how much less we're using. Now, one thing is, when you're using glucocorticoids, they can effectively shut down your HPA axis. What is your HPA axis? Hypothalamus pituitary axis. So this axis is basically deciding how much hormones to create. But systemic use of kind of that concentration over a long period of time can shut down this axis, and then you will have no hormones being created. So if you have no hormones being created, I hope you can do the math and how much side effects you can expect. So glucocorticoids, systemic use, out of the question unless a specialist, what do you call it, the pulmonologist, says it's okay. Okay, so we've now mentioned a lot of processes happening here, but the glucocorticoids have effectively inhibited all of them. So the side effects, once again, we were at the hypothalamus pituitary axis inhibition, so hormones won't be created. But this happens with systemic drug doses, like 20 milligrams or 10 milligrams over a long period of time, far past 5 days. But if we only have 400 micrograms a day, this has not been proven to actually inhibit your hypothalamus pituitary axis. So your hormones won't be reduced, so your side effects will be much less. All right. Now, you must think of the local side effects. Let's quickly go and create another Jimmy. So the same Jimmy is now back in the pharmacy. Maybe I must just make his face. This is Jimmy's face. I'm not making Homer Simpson, I'm making Jimmy. That's a mouth. He's got a big chin because he's a tough kid. Okay. Now he's taking his beclomethasone inhaler. This is a hand. Okay. So now he's taking his 100 microgram dose with the beclomethasone. But remember what I told you, if you're taking a dose of one of these inhalers, only about 20% gets absorbed into your lungs. The rest goes in the back of your throat, epiglottis. Remember, you've got the epiglottis here. So only 20% will go to the lungs. 80% will be swallowed or hit the back of the throat here. So if it hits the back of the throat here, all of these glucocorticoids are potent immune suppressors. Remember, glucocorticoids are effective in this situation because this is abnormally happening in a person with atopic eczema or atopic asthma. Talking for an hour will confuse anyone. Alright, so all of these processes are happening, but remember, they were originally beneficial processes. So they do still inhibit, if this process happens normally, they do still inhibit bacterial or candida from growing. So your immune system is there to protect you. So now, here in the back of the throat, where most of the cortisone went, you are now blocking the immune system. And over there, we've got a lot of bacteria. But we've got streps, we've got staphs, we've got our Candida albicans, etc. But what I want you to understand is, if we inhibit the immune response here, Candida, which is normally occurring there, can now start overgrowing, and you can get thrush. So one of the side effects of using cortisone, inhaled corticosteroids, is thrush. How can we reduce it? By rinsing our mouths with water after inhaling. Or we can make use of a spacer. Remember, the spacer looks something like that. So now the pump will be there, and this is the mouth here. That's a nose. That's an, okay, I don't even know. So if you use a spacer, particles will be distributed within the spacer, and you'll get a much bigger dose in. Maybe we can increase it to 40% or even 50%. So only a much smaller portion will reach the back of the throat. So you'll have a much reduced immune suppression. So this is the worst side effect we get with corticosteroids, and it's something I want you to remember. Some of the other side effects are dystonia, so your voice will change, your voice will get hoarse in a certain sense, and that's more or less the worst of it. So go to your app quickly, run through the treatment of glucocorticoids. You'll see, run through the treatment of chronic asthma. You'll see we start with SABAs, short-acting beta agonist, and then as we go along, we start adding therapies. But the most important controller therapy is the inhaled corticosteroids. And then as we still not control, we start using theophylline, and we start using salmeterol, and etc. It goes on and on. So that's to give you an idea of the basis of therapy within the EML. But there are many, many, many more drugs. So let's go back to our problem children. I think I've mentioned a few, but there are still many, many, many more. Okay. So remember these ones here. So corticosteroids can inhibit, in a certain sense, histamine, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, eosinophilic major basic protein, because this process won't be activated. ECP, it will stimulate beta-2 stimulation, or it will enhance beta-2 stimulation, the inhaled corticosteroids. And remember, muscarinic free glands and muscle, the smooth muscle hypersensitivity and the gland hypersensitivity will be decreased because we're not making leukotrienes anymore. Okay, so you can see cortisone touches on every single pathological mechanism within asthma. Remember it, very important. Okay, now let's go to something else. So we've discussed now short-acting beta agonists. Not enough detail, but I think you can get a lot of it in your Rangendale as well. And it's not really difficult to understand as long as you can understand that you have a smooth muscle layer that has beta-2 receptors in there, and beta-2 stimulation causes bronchodilation. So if we make this area bigger, and now this is dilating, so everything is moving backwards, so we can get more air through there. And I think that's very simple. One thing you have to remember about the beta-1 agonist, beta-2 agonists, are that if the elderly use it, they are more prone to get systemic side effects of beta-1 stimulation, because if you have a lot of beta-2 entering through the lungs, you can get beta-1 stimulation as well. And a long-acting beta agonists like salmeterol are normally not used as relievers. Short-acting beta agonists are always used as relievers. These long-acting like salmeterol are controllers. All right, and these are probably the two most important ones you get in the pharmacy the most. Now, we've covered that. We've covered muscarinic free in a certain sense as well. We said the elderly love to use ipratropium because you don't get that side effect. One thing I can maybe say to you as well is, if you look at the physiology of the body, all right, so let's say there's the lungs and here's the heart. Remember, you've got your 4 rooms here, and you've got a pulmonary artery entering into your, I think this was your left ventricle. And the pulmonary artery is basically a collection of the blood here. So if you inhale something like a beta-1 or beta-2 salbutamol, beta-2 agonist, it will spread from the lungs into the pulmonary artery straight into the heart. And if there's a lot of beta-2 concentrated in the heart here, it will give you beta-1 stimulation, so you can get tachycardia. That's also why we normally say that short-acting beta agonists like salbutamol has a max of 8 puffs a day. Right. If you exceed it in a short time, you'll also be much more likely to get tachycardia. If someone is having an asthma attack, do you worry? Probably not as much. You more worry about just having the person alive first. But in an acute attack, what do we use? Adrenaline. We give an adrenaline injection. And adrenaline also stimulates beta-1, beta-2, alpha-1, alpha-2. It stimulates all of the adrenergic receptors. So adrenaline, which is very potent on beta-2, stimulates it in an acute attack. And these other receptors weren't indicated in the pathology over here, so they don't make anything worse. But adrenaline is in the blood immediately, and it can get to the area much faster because you can get adrenaline as an intravenous infusion or as an intramuscular shot. So, where do I put my little list? We've covered those. Muscarinic free is the most boring one. Now, something that inhibits prostaglandins, we don't really have something like that except for cortisone. We've got a lot of things that inhibit prostaglandins, but do you think it's a good thing to inhibit prostaglandins? Remember that process. Here we have the mast cell. Alright? Inside of it we had phospholipids being changed by PLA2 to arachidonic acid, and then we had LOX and COX reactions happening, and this will make prostaglandins, this will make leukotrienes. Now, if we inhibit COX to make less LOX, like something like ibuprofen, aspirin, diclofenac, etc., what's going to happen with this pathway? More LOX will be created. And this is what happens in aspirin-induced asthma. Because we're using this COX inhibitor, aspirin, ibuprofen, or diclofenac, we will make more LOX. And LOX is much more involved in all of these inflammatory processes in here. Okay, so that is aspirin-induced asthma. Now, I digress once again. So, prostaglandin is not something you really target. If you do target prostaglandins, you will probably cause asthma. So, people who have asthma must not avoid, but cautiously take ibuprofen, aspirin, etc. And of course, children can't take aspirin. Alright, now, let's move downwards here. Histamine 1 receptors are usually ineffective because remember, even if we use histamine 1 receptor blockers, something like chlorampheneramine or something like, that's that word called loratadine or cetirizine, etc., they will inhibit these mast cells from being primed, but they won't change anything about the eosinophils. Alright, so I hope you guys remember, you have the eosinophils also causing the problems there. And the eosinophils are triggered by interleukin, let me get to the beginning, interleukin 5 and 13. So this won't change if you just use histamine 1 receptor blockers. That's why we don't just target histamine, we target suppressing the entire cell from messaging other cells, because that messaging is abnormal. Alright, so histamine we don't really target. I don't know how many times I'm going to say it to you. Let's hope that was the last time. Alright. Now, we also have something called leukotrienes. And now I'm actually referring to things called Zoleutin, Zafirulukast, I can't remember how to spell 100%. Please refer to page 344 and work through it. And Montelukast. I don't doubt there are more of them currently, but these are the ones that are most known. Okay, so Zoleutin is a LOX inhibitor. So it inhibits LOX. So remember this process? Zoleutin will act on this process here and inhibit LOX. Okay, so we'll have less leukotrienes. And now, of course, if leukotrienes enter into this area and they are spreading throughout the body here, they are going to receptors because things work by stimulating receptors. So Montelukast and Zafirulukast will inhibit the receptors where this leukotriene had to go bind. So if it can't bind there, it can't have any effect. Okay, so we've got our leukotriene antagonists and leukotriene modifiers. Okay, but they are generally not nearly as effective as corticosteroids because corticosteroids cover almost all of the things, or basically all of the things, where leukotriene antagonists and leukotriene modifiers don't. Okay, then we have something called the methylxanthines. But I saw you guys don't really know much about secondary messengers, so we can't go into a lot of details about theophylline, because I will most likely confuse you. So theophylline is a systemic treatment. Okay, so oral tablets. And has a narrow therapeutic index. Okay, so what does that mean? You can get a lot of side effects if you use too much, because it has a narrow therapeutic index. Okay,